This is the Authority Company Podcast, conversations with leaders who are designing our future. Hola, I'm Joe Pardavila, and today's guest is Case Lawrence, founder and former CEO of Circus Tricks, now known as SkyZone, the world's largest trampoline park company with more than 300 locations and 50 million guests each year. In his new book, Off the Ground, From the Brink of Bankruptcy to a Billion-Dollar Trampoline Empire, Case shares how he went from the edge of bankruptcy to building a billion-dollar active entertainment business and what failure, family, and fear taught him about risk, identity, and leadership. Case, welcome to the show. How are you?
I'm doing well. Joe, thanks for having me today.
You're very welcome. And so I have to start with this because, I've been doing business podcasts now for close to 5 years. And one of the running jokes I have on my pods are that entrepreneurs are psychopaths. And you are a microcosm of that because your journey of entrepreneurship was not easy. The bankruptcy word gets thrown around in there. Losing almost everything comes up in your journey. Before we get into it, why? Why of all things entrepreneurship, Case?
Yeah, well, that's a great question, and my experience both with myself, but also many of the entrepreneurs I've worked with, studied, interacted with. I teach entrepreneurship at BYU and look into this a lot. A lot of it has to do with your relationship with risk. Now, in my case, it was a little different. I was desperate, especially when I started Circus Tricks, now SkyZone. The circumstances around that weren't about me taking a lot of risk. It was me in a situation where I was desperate and needed to do something. I needed to hustle. So that was a little bit different. I think entrepreneurs who leave good situations, high-paying, stable paycheck situations, they deserve the real plaudits because that's where they are consciously choosing risk and what might be to create, and the opportunity cost is higher. For me, I was desperate. I needed to do something, so I had very little opportunity cost in jumping into entrepreneurship when I started SkyZone.
And I was not joking. I mean, everything basically collapsed because you were so involved in real estate. What a world. I mean, we're recording this at the end of 25, dropping at the beginning of 26. The idea of it's almost like real estate is like this EKG where the highs and lows happen so short in distance. Like, I remember when my wife and I were looking to a home in Charleston, South Carolina in 21, 22. It was crazy. It was like everyone was worried that the interest rates were going to go up. So everyone's buying. Then all of a sudden the interest rates go up and then everyone stops buying. And then all of a sudden you have a stagnant market. And then obviously, better than everyone, the 08 and all that jazz that happened there and all these little bumps and starts. What is it about the world of real estate that makes it so volatile for the dummies like me? Why is it?
And it probably won't be the last, right?
Yeah.
I think we're all going to live through several more of these cycles in real estate. I think nothing is affected more by external events than real estate and people's confidence in the economy on the decision of whether to buy a home or not, take on a mortgage or not. And I think that, that moves in unison. And so, it's a very sensitive market. And I think we're going to continue to have that over the course of the remainder of my lifetime. But yeah, real estate isn't for the faint of heart, nor is any market really. I mean, everything has their highs and lows, but really that's coming back to the entrepreneurship question. Whatever industry you're in, whatever you're going to do, you are subject to external forces and the markets that you operate in. As much as we'd like to think that entrepreneurs, there's a direct correlation between all of their genius and creativity into their success. Yeah, it's a contributing factor, but there's also a lot of luck and good fortune involved, especially in regard to the market and the external events that are going to allow you to succeed. Or if you're running into headwinds, it sometimes doesn't matter how brilliant of an entrepreneur and gutty business person you are, you're not going to overcome the external headwinds that are just, in your way. So you got to be realistic about that.
Yeah, it's funny too because I think a lot. You talk about your struggles with like the banks, like calling you up and be like, "Where's our money?" kind of thing. You're brutally honest in this, and it's so funny. I feel like as someone who's not in finance, bankers are like plumbers. Like you never hear about them until like something bad happens in your house, right? Like I think most people day to day, it's kind of set and forget it with their banks as long as there's enough money in their account and all that jazz. But obviously, if you work in finance, it's different. But I think for a lot of entrepreneurs, when the banker comes calling, that's like your holy crap, the plumber's here and something's gone wrong.
Yeah, yeah. No, I think that's exactly right. The banker's the one guy you don't want to be talking to, and that really became true for me over the course of 2 whole years in the wake of the financial crisis. And it wasn't just me; it was a vast world of entrepreneurs who were in trouble with banks because their loans were non-conforming. It wasn't even that they weren't necessarily performing. They were just non-conforming according to the auditing required by banks and all the mark-to-market accounting that was going on. And so, banks are really a unique business entity. They are certainly there for profit. They're there to make money. They're responding to profit incentives like other banks, or like other businesses, but more than any other business, their first and foremost priority is to be in good standing with the auditor and be in good standing with the FDIC and the requirements that come down on them from federal banking. So that can sometimes lead to these weird mindsets, weird paradigms, weird decision-making matrix for bankers about loans and what they do with them. And that was certainly the case in my situation, and I think many others.
And you write openly about bankruptcy being your proudest business achievement. And it is funny too when that word bankruptcy. I think if you're not an entrepreneur or really deeply involved in the numbers of business, there is sort of like this scarlet letter. But I think within your industry, it's almost a badge of honor. Like it's like
Right.
because media plays up, when you see a blank department store filed for Chapter 11. It's this big sort of splashy story about this company failing for whatever reason. But in your world where you come from, it's not a bad thing. I mean, I know people often joke, and without getting too political, the number of times that our president had filed for bankruptcy. So
Right.
it is one of those things where in the world of business, it's not as bad as it seems. And for you, you say it was a great thing.
Yeah, I mean, the reality is I narrowly avoided it, not of my own merit, but simply because the bank had mercy on me. So I never had to technically file. I was on the precipice of it every day for 2 years. But I think you're right. I think one of the good things that American entrepreneurial culture gets right is that we've done a good job at elevating failure, and building some virtue around failure and around taking chances. And that's really what the whole bankruptcy system in America is about. Another thing, like you said, like banking, that we don't love to talk about, but it's one of the great things about American business is that we have this process that entrepreneurs can shoot big, they can take big risks, and that we have a very streamlined, very established process to deal with the fallout when things don't work out, and to get both those entrepreneurs, their investors, and everyone involved with it a fresh start, and to keep the system moving, to keep people moving forward. We don't often think of bankruptcy as one of the great drivers of our American dream and our American system, but it really is. And we have the best system in the world, the best system in history to deal with failure and get people moving back again.
And in all this that's going on in your life, the bankers, the bubbling bankruptcy, the risks, you're also married. And so, not that baggage is a strong word, but you have things that you bring along with you when something like this happens. So if you don't mind getting a little personal, what were those conversations like with your wife when you're like, bankers called again, looking for their money? Like,
Right.
What were some of those days like?
Yeah, and that's the thing. You really can't draw lines around when you're an entrepreneur, when you are taking risk and you're an owner, that risk, whether your spouse knows it or not, whether your children appreciate it or not, that risk extends and includes them. Their personal lives, their lifestyle, their peace of mind is completely tied up in your entrepreneurship. And so, one of the things I talk about a lot as I teach students or mentor entrepreneurs is I talk about the spouse of an entrepreneur as what I call the silent founder of that business, where, you know, they have all the same risk as the founder, all of the same potential downside, certainly all the upside too, in many respects. But the difference is they're not into the nuances of the risk and where things stand, because they're not dealing with it day to day. They're hearing what you tell them. They're hearing you know what you're communicating. But you know, as entrepreneurs, we tend to understand the nuance of what could happen, what might happen, contingencies, and how everything's interconnected. And it's impossible to really convey that to others, especially even our families. And so they have all the same risk, but they are also have this kind of layer of obliviousness to it. And I've seen so many families fall apart, so many marriages fall apart when a business fails and the damage isn't contained in the business or the failure and pride of the entrepreneur. It troubles into their whole life and personal life. And that's a problem. And it's something that entrepreneurs can kind of get ahead of and in a premeditated way proof themselves to that by really being brutally, radically transparent and honest with their spouse and families about risk and the entrepreneurship in their lives. And so I think that's important. We talk about that in the book extensively.
And I'm just curious because as someone, I'm not obviously an entrepreneur, and I've worked in radio and podcasting my whole life. So when my wife asked me how my day was, I'd be like, it's fine, nothing going on. If unless there was something major, maybe I had a cool guest on that was like really cool. I wouldn't really ever go into detail. When it comes to what your struggles that you were going through at the time, were you afraid to go into too much detail? Was detail your friend, or did it make things more stressful? How did you? And this is obviously a great takeaway for any entrepreneur that's involved in a relationship right now.
It's totally unnatural to dwell on those details. In fact, we want to gloss over them. I think a lot of entrepreneurs, a couple things. One is we're naturally optimistic, so we're naturally hoping for the best in the face of tough details, of tough news. The other thing is that I think there's kind of this old-fashioned ethic of wanting to protect our spouses or our family from the rough and tumble of entrepreneurship or the bad news. So it actually comes from a place of valor, and so you really have to be intentional about really trying to articulate and share where the risk is in the business. And I think it's not natural to entrepreneurs. It's something you have to really work at intentionally. And so, we're going to keep failing at that. I think all of us as entrepreneurs, but it's something I think we need to recognize a little more and talk about a little more, and maybe teach skills for doing it a little better.
In a way, it's almost like that Seinfeld episode, the yada yada. You can't really yada yada your partner, yada yada yada. And now we're bankrupt. Like you almost have to give a little bit of detail, right? And not you can't get too much minutia, but just a little bit, in a way, to not be so, like, I guess, offensive to them, that be like, oh, you wouldn't understand this kind of thing,
right? Yeah. And that's the instinct, right? That's often the instinct. Entrepreneurship these days is a very specialized. All of us are, doing some of these things are very technical. They're very industry specific, very specialized, and it's hard. It's hard to kind of. Not all of us are natural educators, natural teachers about what we're doing to others, including our families.
Yeah. Well, it's funny because I think with most entrepreneurs, I'll just make up a number, I think 90% of them are like a subject matter expertise. Like they're an expert at one thing. And that's why a lot of entrepreneurs aren't really good business people or CEOs because they don't have those other skills you talk about, whether it's communication skills or management, all that jazz. And that obviously muddies the water. All right, before we get into what finally broke right for you, before we get to the good news, I want to ask, during all this that was going on, the trials and tribulations, the having to deal with a family of being aware of what's going on in your life, was there any moment along that way where you're like, maybe I should just go to monster.com or LinkedIn and
Yeah.
see if I can get a 9 to 5?
Yeah.
And how much did that creep into your brain?
Yeah. Well, it did. And I did. So, one of the things that's interesting, and I talk about this in the book, when I created my first trampoline park, it was Central California, small park called Skywalk. And my whole mindset was that it was a side hustle, that it was a temporary small business that would put some money on the table for my family while I looked for a real job. So I was going on Monster, I was going on LinkedIn, doing these things. And the reality is, it wasn't like people were hiring much back then either, given the recession. Then I did a second trampoline park, then a third, then a fourth. And it wasn't until I had done 5 of these and they were all performing, they were all doing great, that my mindset began to shift into, okay, this can be a full-time gig. This doesn't need to be a side hustle. Right through that early phase of getting those first several parks up, that was my mindset, that I was looking for a real job, and that this was kind of a temporary bridge to put food on the table while I did that. And finally it became clear, I got hit over the head with it like a sledgehammer, that this can be the real gig.
Wow. All right, so let's backtrack now. The why trampoline parks. So you kind of spoiled it for me here, but with the idea of starting one of those, and I could say that, growing up, this was not part of my life. I know it's become ubiquitous now. I like I mentioned, I lived in the Charleston area. I think there are more trampoline parks than multiplex cinemas. I think there's like 5 or 6 trampoline parks and like 2 multiplexes. So there's actually more of these than people even realize are around.
Right.
But when you started, they weren't.
No.
Why?
Yeah.
Why? What was your why for it?
Yeah. So first of all, that's a great insight that you had, and I think it's true. Trampoline parks are now a permanent part of the American entertainment culture. They will be in various forms going forward. This action entertainment industry is here to stay. Like you, I didn't grow up with these things, and when I remember hearing for the first time the word trampoline park, and I literally had no mental image to even associate with it. And that's certainly different now. I mean, kids growing up today have been to these, played on them, been to birthday parties and the whole thing. And so when I did my first one, there were probably less than 10 of these in the country at the time. And so it was a very, very much a fringe frontier thing. And that was both an advantage and a disadvantage. So it was an advantage, for example, when getting the curiosity of customers. People are enthralled with the new thing. They're enthralled with things they haven't seen before or done before, and they want to experience that. And so that's an advantage. When it comes to dealing with cities or landlords and trying to get these things approved and permitted and built, it can be a real disadvantage. You really have to fight against preconceived notions and a lot of fear and there were no trampoline parks mentioned by name in any zoning code or any city business permitting lexicon. And so you had to start from scratch in a lot of those situations and really educate the market on what this thing was. And so that's, like I said, good and bad, advantages and disadvantages. And that's changed over the last decade. It's gone from being this very novel, frontier, exotic type of entertainment category to, like you said, being absolutely normalized and institutionalized in the American commercial landscape. And that's where we are today.
Wow. And so let me ask you this, because you went to law school,
Yeah.
and the one thing that I immediately think about is law and trampoline park. Is part of my French, shit's going to happen. Like people are going to get hurt. How did your law side of your brain connect with your entrepreneurial side of your brain? Of like, my God, if I do this, I'm gonna have to have a lawyer on retainer for the rest of my life. Tell
Yeah.
me about how you grapple with that.
No, I think, one of the things I teach students and I talk about a lot, we talk a lot about product market fit when we're talking about entrepreneurship. And there is a thing called that I've coined, there's product entrepreneur fit, meaning why is this entrepreneur, this person, why am I the right person to bring this product forward and succeed with it? And looking back now on my experience, I think one of the reasons I was the right person at the right time to do this was my legal background. And it's to your point, there are, there's a lot of liability in this business. And I think most entrepreneurs early on were very scared of that. Many were scared off by it. And I think because I had that legal background, I was able to manage it and deal with it constructively and not overreact to it. And that allowed me to probably grow when others couldn't or wouldn't. And so in that accidental way, my law background really helped me scale this trampoline park concept.
Without getting too granular about it, is it the disclaimers that people sign? Is it very similar to like when you go to a baseball stadium that if you get hit by a foul ball, like you can't sue the like? Is it almost as easy as that? As long as something's not egregious, like you guys left a pail of water on the floor and someone slipped. But like, is it as simple as that?
Yeah, Joe, that's a great question, and it's yes. So, as our economy has moved from buying things to wanting to have experiences, the courts have generally recognized waivers in the American court system, have recognized that as a way for entrepreneurs to bargain with consumers to take on the risk of what they're doing. Otherwise, entrepreneurs simply couldn't provide these types of experiences, and consumers want them. They want these experiences. They want entrepreneurs to provide them. And in order to do that, there has to be a bargain there of the consumer saying, listen, I know that there's some risk involved. That's part of the reason I like this activity. That's why I like jumping on trampolines or going on a zip line or whatever it might be. And I'm willing to take that general risk. And I think what you mentioned and what's true, that doesn't acquit any business owner or entrepreneur from liability of not doing everything they can to promote safety and everything state of the art that they can do to make the experience as safe as possible for consumers. But to put entrepreneurs on the line for simply providing the use, that's not America and not what American consumers want. And courts have recognized that, and I think that's a good thing in our business system.
All right, so tell me about the scale up of this. You mentioned the fact that you kind of accidentally scaled it to 5 when you realized, oh, this is now the thing I do.
Yeah.
How does it work? Like, is it very much like any kind of franchise model where you got to, it's all about finding the space, setting it up, all the money that takes to actually the sunk cost that you have to do to actually build it from scratch each time you do it. It's not like you can just get a restaurant space and all of a sudden, oh, I've got a kitchen in there. This is something you tend to have to build from scratch.
Yeah.
Tell me about that.
Yeah, no, it's a great question. And it's really, it's a unique exercise getting a trampoline park up and developed. For one, finding a building that will work is its own needle in a haystack treasure hunt, because you need ceiling heights that work. You can't have a ton of columns inside. You need parking. You need the location right. So just finding a building that will work can oftentimes take months and months and months. So that's the first obstacle. Capital is always an obstacle. And when I did my first trampoline park, I did the whole thing for less than $500,000. I got the whole thing up and running for that much. Today, if you want a competitive, state-of-the-art, right-sized trampoline park in an American market, you're looking at 3.5 million minimum to
Wow.
do that. So the sophistication, the production values, the everything about these parks has increased, right?
Why so? Why was that big jump, Case? Why was the like?
Yeah,
That's pretty, from half a
yeah.
million to 3 million. What made it that?
Well, one thing was, early on, if you look at the early parks that I did or that others did, they were 100% trampolines. They were just wall-to-wall trampolines. And now, over time, American consumers have demanded, like we talked about, novelty, diversity of attraction. And so now these parks have diversified attractions that cost more, that are more specialized. So that's part of it. And competition has driven it. You didn't need to do much if you were the only trampoline park within 3 hours, right? And you just filled a warehouse with trampolines and people would come. Now, as we talked about, there's competition. There's a lot of others out there. And so that competitive drive to one up the competition, to diversify and incrementally make your park better has driven up the cost. And then the size of the parks have gotten bigger. I think as the economics have manifest themselves in our industry, it's become clear that bigger parks make more sense financially. And so, and that's, entrepreneurs have taken that point. And so instead of doing, my first one was like 12,000 square feet. Now, people are doing 30, 35, 40,000 square feet. And so just the square foot costs are obviously going to be a lot bigger. So those are a few factors, and I expect that to continue.
I wonder if like the loss of retail has been the gain for you guys, because I do notice that a lot of these trampoline parks that are action parks, whatever you want to call them, are in like circuit cities,
Right.
or like or former department
Yeah.
stores. So in a way, I know what you're saying, that there's that needle haystack thing, but because of a lot of retail closing, it does give more opportunity for folks in your space to find something that probably wouldn't have been there maybe 10, 20 years ago.
That's a great observation, and Joe, and it's really true. So the rise of the trampoline park industry has coincided with what we call the Amazon effect, where these big box retailers have gone out of business. They, Amazon has dismantled that big box business model. And what you find is across the American landscape, there are millions of square feet of this inline retail real estate that doesn't have a lot of natural secondary users for it. So, a Dick's Sporting Goods, a Toys R Us, those are all bespoke, custom built buildings. When they leave, there aren't a lot of natural secondary inhabitants of those spaces. They're just really big, and trampoline parks have become one of the most ideal secondary users for that space. And so it's no coincidence that the rise of our industry has coincided with that movement in commercial real estate.
Yeah, it's funny. And I want to pick your brain on this because this whole experience thing, and I know this sort of started with millennials and even Gen Z. Like, people are saying that because people thought that movie theaters would die because Gen Alpha wouldn't want to go to movies. And actually, it's the opposite.
Yeah.
Gen Alpha wants to go to movie theater because they want to have like that Minecraft experience of they're all being together. So there is this move of people wanting more and more experiences. But you are seeing that sometimes it's hard for those experience type businesses to have that repetition. And I'll use the example of Topgolf. You saw Topgolf have that huge surge, even got acquired by, I think, Titleist or something like that. And then there was like, it plateaued because what happened was people were going for either a party or once a year, as opposed to going over and over again.
Right.
And
Right.
and you're seeing, and obviously it becomes the cost, right? People like, is it worth for me to go to Topgolf where I'm going to spend $200-300, or I should just go to the driving range and hit some balls?
Right.
Obviously, the experiences are different, but generally the same thing. You're swinging a club. So tell me about in terms of repetition, bringing back customers. What is that world like in the space of these action parks?
First of all, that's a very true observation. And as our economy moves from products to experiences, the Achilles heel and the opportunity with experiences is providing them in a way that people want to come back and do it multiple times. There are a lot of things that we all want to do once, and we scratch that itch and we're done. And so staying power for any of these experiential concepts is built on building this into a lifestyle and making consumers want to come back. We mentioned earlier why the costs have gone up, and that's part of it. Like, there's a drive to always have new attractions, the new thing. And we've seen that for decades. Like, I was a big fan of amusement parks growing up as a kid in California, Magic Mountain, Great America, Disneyland, all of that. And every year, every other year, these amusement parks would have to roll out a new attraction in order to get people to have a new reason to come.
That
And
cost hundreds of millions of dollars.
yeah, and that's the challenge, for an amusement park. A new roller coaster is going to be millions of dollars. And one of the great things about our format with these adventure parks is that we can roll out a new attraction for a lot less than several million bucks. We can do it for low hundreds of thousands and do that. And so there is an art to the business of coming up with the new thing, and we're seeing that now. There's the slick slides. We were the first to bring the ninja parks, ninja courses into the parks, and some of the other acrobatics, and that was good. And now there will continue to be these new novelties introduced because the American consumer want something new, and they want a new excuse to go visit, and that's never going to end. That process and cycle is not going to stop.
And tell me about that cost. I mean, because again, that's the thing that Topgolf was struggling with, where
Right.
people were like, it's just too GD expensive to go like 2 or 3 times a month. Maybe you're doing it once a month because of the cost. And I know a lot of these action parks, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, are big with memberships, like you buy like monthly deals and stuff like that. So how are you controlling the cost so you get those repeat customers?
Yeah. That you just identified kind of the economic eureka moment in FEC, family entertainment centers, trampoline parks, and everything like it, has been the membership model. And that really happened. We really began that before COVID. COVID kind of interrupted it, but then coming out of COVID, it's very widespread now. And that is a direct effort to counter that dynamic that you mentioned of just people of the visitor return visit. And so these memberships have been a key tool in doing that, and really turning these trampoline parks into an outsourced play area for families where they can use over and over and over again, and not just the once a year birthday party.
Yep.
And that's certainly, we do a lot of birthday parties, but that effort to turn it into kind of a third space, an outsourced yard, an outsourced playground is the future and the way to combat that problem.
And I guess ultimately the one thing you guys want to avoid is being the bowling alley, right? Because because after a while, what will happen is you got the 80-year-old guy who's in a bowling club or something like that. And I'll see it, like, growing up, bowling alleys were everywhere. Every town had their one, and now they are very scarce because of the idea of, like, it became like the birthday party place for kids, and then the old timers. And obviously the old timers aren't going to be hitting up the action park, or maybe they will. I don't know. But I guess that's one of the things, like, how, in your mind, I know, and we're going to get into like your day to day, but like in your mind, people that run these parks, how do you avoid the fate of the bowling alley where it becomes just the niche group of people that are going to go there, and it's just going to be enough to maintain to keep the lights on?
Yeah, that's actually a great example and a great cautionary tale, as you say. And I think, my mindset, and I think that the mindset of the leaders in our industry now has been, look, we are in a 4-wall business. Anything we can do to entertain kids and families within 4 walls fits into our model. And we're not going to anchor in on just bowling, or frankly, just trampolines. When I did my first parks, they were 100% trampolines, then 95% trampolines. Today, if you're to walk into a SkyZone, maybe 30% of the attractions in the park are trampolines. So it's diversified that much, and that's just going to continue. And I think there are uses that we haven't even imagined yet that people will find a way to fit into this format. And so you have to have a little optimism and faith about the creativity of the industry to keep coming up with those. And I do. I think we will continue to come up with them.
Awesome. So after all of this, you're no longer CEO. You're no longer the
Yeah.
hot, the big boss with the hot sauce.
Yeah.
As we say in radio. What is that? What is life like for Case Lawrence after everything we kind of went
Yeah.
through? You build this empire of trampoline parks, action parks, whatever you want to call them, and now you're no longer CEO.
Yeah.
What is that? What has that change of life been for you?
Yeah. It's actually great. You find new pursuits and new things to sink your teeth into. For me, I've enjoyed teaching. I enjoy mentoring and teaching up and coming entrepreneurs. And, that's been a great outlet for me. And I think that, part of being an entrepreneur is realizing that, there's a natural timeline to every one of these ventures and projects, and knowing when it's time to move on. And I think I did that at a good time, and I haven't had any regrets about doing that. And so I've got plenty of new projects I'm working on and being creative with, and that's keeping me real happy.
Oh, good for you. That's awesome. Now, one of the things that I remember I joked at the top that, like, I think most entrepreneurs are psychopaths. I think the ones that should be committed are the serial entrepreneurs, the ones who go back and do it over and over again.
Right.
Is that something you still have left in the tank where you could start something new?
I think let me say this, Joe, about that. I think there is a natural hubris in some entrepreneurs. I look at what has happened with SkyZone and how it's grown and what it's become, and I realize how lucky I am, how lucky the whole path was to make that happen. And it just seems so presumptuous of me to think that I could capture that lightning in a bottle again, or snap my fingers and do something else that would be that successful. And so really, I think it's a fool's errand to try to compete with that or repeat that, or think that you can do that again. Instead, it's got to be about creativity. What do you enjoy creating for the sake of creating it and putting it into the world, and not with the expectation that it's going to be the next SkyZone? I think that's only going to be frustration. And I think a lot of entrepreneurs run into that wall. They think they're just going to keep stamping out hits. And there's so much that goes into that, so much good fortune and luck, frankly. And so hopefully your motives and your pursuits become a little more pure and altruistic as you move forward in life. That's been true of me, and I think a lot of entrepreneurs experience that as well. So I think that's a good thing.
That's awesome. That's awesome. All right, Case, I always wrap up these conversations taking folks behind the dedication of the book. And we kind of mentioned your wife earlier, but to Carrie, the silent founder of SkyZone and the silent author of this book. So I have to ask, would this had all been possible if you didn't have someone like Carrie in your life?
No. And that's really one of the key points I hope to communicate in the book. Is I was very fortunate that I survived these ups and downs. I was even more fortunate I had a partner who was willing to go through those up and downs and survive them with me, and that's so rare. And I'm really appreciative of her and her unique ability to weather that. And I'm grateful for my kids. One of the fun things about being in the business of play is that I was able to involve my kids maybe more than some other business pursuits or careers I could have been a part of. And my kids became my innovation committee. We would, in the summers, pack it up and go on tour of our latest parks, our latest attractions. They would give me feedback. They would participate in them. And they had soon developed the confidence to give me very frank feedback on what they thought of different things. And that was invaluable. That was really a key piece as we innovated and grew over those many years. So I'm grateful for them as well, and I'm grateful that they could be involved to the degree they were.
Awesome. You can read all about it in Off the Ground: From the Brink of Bankruptcy to a $1 Billion Trampoline Empire. His name is Case Lawrence. Case, thanks so much for the time. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Joe, for having me. Truly, this has been a fun conversation.
And that's going to do it for this episode. If you want to find out more information about Case and our other amazing authors, go to theauthoritycompany.com.